Open our Bibles tonight to Esther chapter 7. We're going to cover verses 1 through 10, but I know you won't believe this. I am trying to keep my sermons under an hour, actually quite a bit under. I'm trying to keep them. Someone at the conference the other week said that, the conference is great, but my mind can only absorb what my bottom can stand. So keeping something like that in mind, I don't want to keep you past the point that you go to sleep or that you lose interest. I'm not going to read the verses right now because we'll read them as we go through. But in looking at this, I like to imagine how people might have felt and what reactions they might have had when I read certain things in the Bible. Reading the book of Esther. Esther is one of those books that I don't think is very hard to imagine the various characters and the events that helped shape their life. The one character we know the least about is Haman. What kind of home life did he have? What was there in his life that made him so full of hate and anger and bitterness? What was there in growing up that turned him into an arrogant, egotistical, narcissistic maniac? Was it his background? And I'm a firm believer, you cannot blame background on everything, but I also know that the way you were raised has a good or bad, has a tremendous influence on how I think 74 years later, the way I was raised still affects me. I've overcome a lot of it, at least the worst of the worst. But as I read, I like to think, I wonder what was going through their mind. Imagine just for a moment if Esther's parents had not died when she was young. Imagine just for a moment that Mordecai had not gotten a job helping guard the palace. Suppose Mordecai was not a man of principle, and when Haman walked by, Mordecai, like everybody else, bowed down and worshiped Mordecai. Suppose he had not been a man of conviction and a man of principles that refused to bow down and worship another man. What might have happened had Mordecai not overheard the two men plot to kill the king? The king might have been killed. Haman might have become the king. See, I like to think when I'm studying. You get the idea that each and every part of Esther's life, Mordecai's life, even down to the job that Mordecai had, were all part of God's plan that had to fit together like a hand in a glove to have the conclusion that we're going to have in the last half of chapter 7. If any one thing had changed, history would have been changed. History would not have been favorable the Jews might have been annihilated if one thing changed. Now, we saw last week Haman was forced to honor Mordecai. And we looked at the humiliation. We looked at the embarrassment. He was so excited of being invited to the queen's house, where only he and he alone was invited to dine with the king and queen. He was on top of the world until he saw Mordecai. Then his anger and his wrath took over. And he vowed and declared, I'm going to kill Mordecai tomorrow morning. Mordecai is out of here. He's no longer my problem. Suppose the king had slept that night. Suppose the court clerk had picked up a different book or opened to a different chapter. We can only imagine. Now Haman, instead of being on top of the world, is so full of anger, so full of hate, because he, of all people, had to honor Mordecai. I mean, this is not in my notes, but I'm gonna ask you anyway. Do not raise your hand. I do not want to know. I want you to think. I want you to know, but I don't need to know. I'm not a Catholic priest. I don't need to know your deepest thoughts and your deepest sins. But is there somebody at work, somebody where you shop, maybe it's one of your neighbors, that every time you see them or think about them, your blood pressure starts to go up and up? 130 over 80, 140 over 90, 150 over 95, 200 over 120. Is there anybody that you, just thinking of them and what they did or maybe still doing, just infuriates you? I can think of a few if I allowed myself. You can understand how Haman must have felt. In the last verse of chapter 6, he is so full of anger, so full of hate, that he forgets the most important thing on his calendar, which is dinner with the king and queen. I had a discussion the other day at the conference. Several of us preachers were standing around, and the subject of anger came up in our discussion. And someone said, "Oh, they make me so mad." And I said, "Stop. Nobody can make you mad." How many of you know what I mean by that? Okay, most of you. For those of you that didn't get it, let me explain it again. Satan's job is to tempt you. Satan's job is to do anything and everything he can possibly do to destroy your testimony as a Christian, to destroy your influence, and to keep you from enjoying the joy of the Lord. Paul said, "Rejoice." And again I say, rejoice. Satan's job is to stop you from rejoicing. Now, can he put stimuli in front of you? I'll tell you one of my pet peeves, and God is, he's cured me about 95% of the time. The other 5%, I have to stop and say, okay, God, this person has taken my mind. Please give it back to me. How many of you have ever pulled up behind somebody at a traffic light and the light turns green and they're sitting there and the light turns green and they're still sitting there and sitting there and sitting there, and it's like, I don't blow my horn anymore because they may get a gun and come back and shoot me. But boy, I want to go up there and say, put your stupid phone down. It's one of my pet peeves. And sometimes I have to really watch myself because I can get angry. I can allow Satan to use that blooming idiot in front of me who needs to put their phone down. And I had one the other day. She went through the whole green light, turned red, and she's still sitting there texting on her phone. And it's like, but you know what? She cannot make me mad. She can be a stimulus that Satan uses, but she cannot make me mad. Anger is a choice. Anger is a decision. Mordecai is angry to the point that he forgets, I have an appointment with the king and the queen. That brings us to chapter 7. The king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. Now this is where I let my imagination kind of run loose here a little bit. They walk in, and if you know anything about ancient palaces, they were decorated the most beautiful, the most expensive decorations, the most expensive everything. Everything was the absolute nicest that money could buy. Everything was decked out. Everything was beautiful. And just walking into the palace, one would be struck by the awe and beauty of the palace. How many of you have been out to see and I'm going to get them wrong, but you'll know what I mean, the light encounter out at the Creation Museum? The light encounter, several, good. It's overwhelming, isn't it? I mean, literally, there are millions of lights strung up all over that place. The play was at the Ark Encounter the other night. And as we drove in and then drove back out, millions, and I don't mean thousands, I mean millions of lights hung and strung all over the grounds there at the Ark Encounter. Overwhelming beauty. I mean, we're talking beautiful beyond imagination. And so you walk in, and the room is decorated as only a queen could do. You walk in, and you're struck with all the beauty. And then over on the side somewhere is the biggest banquet table that the queen could prepare. I can see Haman walking in saying, wow, this is nice. I'm the only one here that gets to enjoy this with the king. Wow, look at that food. Man, let's eat. I'm starving. Look at all of that food. And the king walks in. He doesn't see the decorations, doesn't see the food. But in verse 2, the king in verse 1 came to the banquet, and the first thing out of the king's mouth is, Esther, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. What is thy request? And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom. See, I said the other night, Esther was super, super wise. Had she marched in that first day, and the king extended the scepter, and she went up and said, honey, you got to save my life, she might not have gotten anywhere. But she used her brain, Well, I'm doing God's will. There's a right way and a wrong way. No, there's not a right way and a wrong way to do God's will. There's a right way and a wrong way to do our will, thinking that we're doing God's will. She thought, before I make my request, I've got to have the king's undivided attention. Now, you men, please don't give me, if you want to wink at me so that your spouse doesn't see you, okay, I'll take that. But has your wife ever talked to you and asked you a question, and it's like, what did you say? My wife does that to me all the time. You're not listening. I heard every word. Well, what did I say? Do I really need to repeat it back to you? You don't know what you said? She understood. You've got to get his undivided attention. If he's looking at all the beautiful decorations, you don't have his attention. If he's smelling the food and saying, man, I'm starving, let's eat, you don't have his attention. My wife has a horrible habit. It's like, honey, look at me. I want to make sure you're listening before I say this. When she does that, I know I better pay attention, or that frying pan we talked about will end up on the backside of my cranium somewhere. She had to get his attention. How does she do that? She invites him to dinner, and when he comes the first night, she says, I'm going to make you wait. I'm going to make you wait another day. She's getting his attention. So when he comes in the second night, Haman's looking at all the decorations. Haman's over sampling the food. Haman is over, thinking, let's eat, come on. Forget that stupid request. We're here for a banquet. Let's eat. But the king says, okay, honey, you've got my attention. You risk your life for something. The moment you step through that door, you literally put your life in your hands. You invited us to a banquet. You made me wait another 24 hours. Honey, I want to know what is so important that you've gone to all this trouble to get my attention. Ladies, take a lesson. If your husband's not listening, that's not a good time to tell him, oh, by the way, the doctor called and I got stage 4 cancer and I got 3 weeks to live. That's not the time nor place. If you want to break bad news or good news, anything important, use a little logic, a little psychology here, and say, I'm not going to tell you till I know I've got your attention. So when he asked, okay, honey, what is so important that you risk your life, you fix 2 huge banquets, I want to know what is so important. Now, at that point in verse 3, Esther chooses her words carefully. Verse 3, then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight. Now, every word, I can imagine she probably had gone over this and over this and over this so many times that when he finally asked, she didn't, I don't want to make a big, let me think. No. She knew exactly what she wanted to say before he even asked. She had gone over it. She had thought it through. She had everything exactly like she wanted to say. Notice, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, very respectful to him as king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. Verse 3, she realized her life and the life of her people literally was in the hand of the king, and she needed mercy. And so I'm not asking because I deserve this. I'm not asking because I have a right to this. I'm asking if I have found favor or mercy in thy sight. I understand my petition is entirely in your hands and your hands of mercy. And so I'm asking for mercy. Let my life. I said, well, she was selfish. She put herself first. No, she knew the king would respond to an attempt on her life before he would respond to the life of anyone else. So she said, my life is at stake. My life is on the line. And if I find mercy in your sight to spare my life, then may I also find mercy in your sight to spare the life of my people. Did that soak in, everybody? By the way, I'm talking to ladies, but this applies to men. This applies, on the job. This applies, anywhere and everywhere. I took a course years ago, and they literally stressed you try to know whatever question they ask, you've already thought it through and have an answer that is going to be respectful an answer that is going to present the situation, but you've already thought it through. The natural instinct, what do you want, honey? I want you to kill Haman. Wrong. But she put herself at his mercy and said, honey, would you please, out of mercy, spare my life? You know, that's kind of how we go to Christ, isn't it? No one that I know of that was truly saved. I'm not talking about making a profession. I'm talking about someone who is truly saved, was ever saved by going to God and said, all right, God, you saved me. Everybody I know that was truly saved, it's, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. Lord, I'm not worthy. I don't deserve it. I'm a sinner. I'm the chief of sinners. Lord, I am a wicked, sinful person, and I come not because I'm better than anyone else, not because I deserve it more than anyone else. Lord, I come because thou art a merciful God. And oh God, I'm pleading for mercy. Esther understood that. Honey, if I have found favor in thy sight, if it pleased the king, you don't have to. You're under no obligation. But if it pleased the king, let my life be given me at thy petition. And then in verse 4, and this is crucial. If you read verse 4, we are sold, I and my people, now notice, to be destroyed, to be slain, and perish. That is a direct quote from Haman's decree. There's no embellishing here. You know somebody that embellishes everything they say? You know, it's like, oh, the house is on fire. There were flames coming out the windows. Flames were bursting through the roof. Flames were burning through the walls. You know, that may all be true, but that's also embellishing. She didn't embellish. She strictly stuck with the script. Literally quoting Haman's own words. That way there can be no misunderstanding. Well, you misunderstood what I wrote. Well, let's see here. Here is your decree. Here are your exact words. Tell me, where did I misunderstand? When you're dealing with a situation, stick with what you know. Several years ago, when I was with the police, went to a house to make an arrest. We got there. The officer knocked on the door and said, and I don't remember the guy's name, but is so-and-so here? And his mother said, he's not here. He said, well, do you know where he is? We have a warrant for his arrest. No, I have no idea where he is. Well, do you know when he might be back? Nope, no idea. Well, he said, well, I'm going to have to impound the car. Now, there's a long reason, but I'm going to have to impound the car and have it taken. When he said that, the mother had been standing with the door just barely open, looking out, talking through this little crack. When he said, "We're going to impound your car," she threw the door open. "You're not taking my car!" There sat the guy right there that we were wanting to arrest. The officer went in and said, "You're under arrest." Mama said, Mama was about 4'8", 4'9", weighed about 350. Mama said, "You're not taking my son," and she literally plowed into the officer. The son, seeing his mother now attacking the officer, decided to join his mother in the attack. The officer did something. He apologized later, said it was the biggest mistake he made. He was concerned for my safety, not realize we had been trained just for those situations. But he was concerned about my safety. He said, "Wilbert, get out of here." So I went outside and called 911. Within 5 minutes, we had 15 million police officers there. But they filed charges against him for police brutality. I'm sure your cousins probably already had that. I was the only witness. So I had to be debriefed, I had to be interrogated, I had to be all of those things. And when the sergeant called me back, I'll never forget, he said, "I don't want your opinion." Well, I thought no, I don't want your thinking. I don't want your feelings. When I turn the recorder on, I want you to say exactly what you saw and what you did and what the officer did, even to the point when he eventually brought him out in handcuffs. I don't care about your opinion. Stick with the facts that you know firsthand. The officer was so exonerated. But Esther, stick with what I know. I know for a fact that my people have been, we're going to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. There's no embellishment. There's no hypotheses. There's no guessing. This is from Haman's own words. Stick with what you know. She read the decree, so Haman could not say, "Oh, you misunderstood." No. I did not misunderstand. Here it is in your own handwriting. This is what you said. It's hard to argue with facts. Let's move on quickly. Well, Esther, you're paranoid. Nobody's trying to kill you. You're paranoid. Let me read it again and tell me where my paranoia comes in. I have to wonder at what point Haman began to recognize his own writing. He's looking at the decorations. He's looking at the food, thinking, "Hurry up, let's eat." And then all of a sudden, he hears "destroyed, slain, and perish." And he's thinking, that sounds terribly familiar. Where have I heard that before? Oh, that's taken right out of my own decree. Well, the king reacts. In verse 5, "Who is he and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? Who would be so stupid and so brazen as to try to kill the queen in her own palace? Now, it appears the king really, truly had no idea that Haman was the mortal enemy. You know, friendship can sometimes blind us to the faults of those around us. I'll give you a real quick example. Some of you were members here at the time. Many of you were not. If you recognize the person, please don't give it away. But when I was in Ohio, we supported a missionary, very, very, very good friend of ours. He was in our home more than my wife and I together could count. We were extremely close friends. Now, this is going over when we moved to Texas. I got the church there to support him. And during the 5 years that I was there, we sent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to him as a missionary. I told everybody he's one of the best missionaries on the earth. And I really, truly believed it. And then a pastor friend of ours went to his country where he was a missionary and came back and asked me if I had any suspicions of wrongdoing. And I said, absolutely not. He's my friend. I trust him with everything I own. Well, he said, when I was there, 2 and 2 are supposed to equal 4, but they kept coming up 5, and I can't find out why. And it's like, you're wrong. You totally misread, the situation. He's a good guy. He's as honest as the day is long. I know him. I defend him. I stand behind him. I will fight for him. And I'm not going to let anybody run him down. Well, more rumors began leaking out. And more rumors began leaking out. We were mailing his letter for him. We were mailing 500 to 1,000 letters a month to churches all over the United States. One day I got a letter signed by the deacons, every deacon in the church that he was pastor of on the mission field. And I thought, this is unusual. The deacons asked me, signed by every deacon, can you send us copies of his monthly report? It's like it's public knowledge. It's no secret. We're mailing 500 to 1,000 a month. So I went through, printed out a bunch of copies of his financials, sent it to the deacons, and I'll make it short. But it was proven beyond not only a reasonable doubt, it was proven beyond any doubt, absolute. I defended him right up until a pastor showed me the evidence in writing. He had embezzled over $1 million from the church there and the churches here. I was devastated. Not only that, but he was also brought up before the church for raping 2 women in the church. I was destroyed. I was devastated beyond words. I literally trusted him with my life. I trusted him with everything I had. And he betrayed not only me, but all the churches that supported him. If you can imagine embezzling over $1 million, raping 2 women. He called me several times and chewed me out because he blamed me for exposing him. I trusted him. I believed him. He said he was innocent. I never questioned him. And so when the king said, "Who?" he was not prepared for the answer he's about to get. In verse 6, Esther doesn't back down. I wonder, was she nervous? You know, you're sitting there. Here's your husband, the king. Here's the second in command to the king. And you are about to tell the king that his second-hand man is a murderer. I can imagine how nervous she might have been. How will Haman react? Will he get mad and throw a fit and grab a carving knife off of the table and stab us? How will he react when I point him out? I was reminded of what God told Jeremiah. In chapter 1, verse 8, God told Jeremiah, "Be not afraid of their faces, for I am with thee to deliver thee, saith the Lord." Verse 7, the king is furious. How could he have been so blind? For years I had trouble with myself after being so betrayed. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen how could the king be so deceived by Haman? How could he have endangered the queen's life and not even realize that he had endangered her life? I can only imagine the thousands of thoughts that flooded his mind as he heard the wicked man is none other than Haman, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. How could I have been so used by Haman? What can I do to make this right? Haman must be made an example so that no one else will ever even attempt such a thing. Esther used her brain to set the scene. She used Haman's own words against him. Was she nervous? I can't help but think she surely must have been. But she did not let her nerves keep her from pointing out the adversary and wicked enemy, Haman. Now, hit the pause button, because we're not going to see the king's reaction until next week. But you see, the Bible is not just theology. It's also a very practical book. How to deal with people. You don't get in their face and see who can scream the loudest. Sometimes you have to wait. Wait patiently. Plan your time. Plan your words. Don't back down. Be bold, but also use your mind.